joining us for political talk on another PolitiPod Live. Tonight we'll cover the Artemis spaceship and soft power, murder on ice. Tom is still gone, so we'll have some hyper-local New York news, as well. Oh, and accomplices. We'll also have our two segments, more on this, and international news.
Yeah, Tom Bickle is out of pocket this week, so he will not be joining us. But he'll be back next week if you're a Tom Bickle fan.
Who is not a Tom Bickle fan? I'm Hannah Soldner.
I'm Matt Nisanoff.
And today we will start with the Artemis spacecraft and soft power. Um, so I wanted to talk about this because, first of all, a lot of my friends are talking about it. Um, and it's just like, it's cool in a time where, like, I think a lot of news is um, not ideal. It's neat to have this thing. And, the reason why I think it's politically relevant for PolitiPod is that, first of all, there's both Americans from the US and then Canadians on board. And so, like, while we're alienating a lot of people, it's nice to have this moment of working together with another country. And also just the idea of like, um, it can sound a little sort of bleak to say soft power, but it's like, there's been so much sort of like strong many actions from our country recently. It's neat to be like traveling to the moon or traveling to outer space is a huge political deal, and it has been ever since, Sputnik back in the day and since before then. So I wanted to talk about this. And also, yay for our government doing things that are spectacle, but not deadly or antagonizing or etc. So, Matt, what do you think about this?
Well, and there's a point that you made when we were discussing it earlier, and that is that it's a host of nations working together. You kind of hinted at it there for a second, but it is also true that we have a friend from Canada who's joining in, and there are people from different places and all working together. And that has been a hallmark since well, from before, certainly before this time, the space shuttle, the retracting arm. They made a big announcement and a big deal out of how the retracting arm for the original space shuttle was made in Canada, right, and had the Canadian flag on it. And here's another way that we're working together with our Canadian friends instead of antagonizing them. And so that's wonderful to see.
Yeah, and I feel like it's been um there's just a lot that's neat about it. Like, this is the furthest away humans have been, and also, speaking of international, there was I think a docking with the International Space Station and communication with the people on board there. Um, and so, yeah, it feels so kind of rare that we can have something that is like truly like historically and politically important, but that is also like um broadly just good. It's not, I mean, you could make arguments about fuel and et cetera, and don't scratch too deeply below the surface, but like it's not it's like a win-win. There's not win-lose, it's not um, an embarrassment, it's not trying to embarrass others. It's just like something that's like truly quite important, and also I feel just like it can bring people together to be like, this is a cool thing we're doing. So
Certainly agree. So we all agree that it's cheers to the government for doing a positive thing that's also not only that but also beneficial, because from space travel in the past we've wound up learning things and fly it and been able to learn other things and build other things. So it's always led to some greater good as well as being an accomplishment that has been done.
yeah, I mean, think about, I mean, if you are on your phone using GPS or any of that stuff. That all exists because of this same broad category. Oh, and now let's move on to more on this. So we wanted to talk about Clay Fuller, who you might be like, who is that? Why should I care? Um, and after doing some research online, it seems like there's actually not a lot of reasons to care. But the big reason is that he has won the seat that was previously occupied by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and he will be serving out the rest of her time in office, which is until next January, I believe. Um, and also, he barely won against the Democrat who was running against him, and he won over him by a lesser margin than Taylor Greene won on her last election. So, it's definitely something to be watching how the state is changing. Trump, of course, is claiming this is a big ally, it's a big win for him. But the fact that he won by, a lesser margin, um, is worth, wondering, is it as big of a win? And we'll see, about Clay and how he rules. He was previously a judge. He was previously in the military. Um, but you know, in a certain sense, the fact that we don't know about him is maybe a good sign. There's a comedian one time who said years ago that like you can tell your country is not doing well by like how many people like kind of around the world who shouldn't know who your people are know. And I feel like a lot of people know who Marjorie Taylor Greene is. Um, and there's no reason for them to know unless they live in the United States. So, hopefully he will be um, less harmful.
It would be nice. Actually, I will disagree with you on that point because here's a guy who is running for a seat as a Republican. Trump's support and endorsement, and even in the primary, which was a jungle primary, meaning that anybody could run, and scores of people, three Democrats and 8 or 10 different Republicans, including a state senator who gave up his seat just to run in the primary, and this Clay Fuller won. So in the primary, he actually came in second to the Democratic candidate. The Democratic with more votes, but did not get over 50% of needed in the primary to take the seat. So it went to a runoff between the two of them, and it's wound up being Clay Fuller who took it when it was a one-on-one contest. But having Trump's endorsement, I don't know that that bodes well. I expect that we'll wind up with Marjorie Taylor Greene, another version of early Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone who's a more of a sycophant who's just trying to show that he's earned the support of, and the endorsement of Donald Trump, and he did it for he gained it for a reason,
Yeah, I do want
and that
to.
is that he's going
Oh,
to be the same kind of. No, go right ahead.
yeah. So, I mean, I do. Yeah, your point is well taken, and I do want to adjust some things because, like, Clay is not he's really into immigration enforcement and these kinds of things. So he's definitely not going to be, snuffing out ICE or whatever. And then also, now that I think back about my words, I definitely want to make sure I'm not on the group of people who is in any way insinuating that like the major problem with Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene in this case is like her outlandishness. Like when sometimes you'll hear people and be like, I like Trump's policies, but like, why does he have to be like so mean or whatever? It's like, no, 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 no. Like, I don't want Taylor Greene just in like a more buttoned up political package either. That's actually in many ways worse. Um, so yeah, I want to make sure that like that I'm clear about that. It's I whatever she's done to the discourse is not good, but um, calming the discourse, but having the same effects at the end of the day is absolutely not better.
Fair enough. And with that, I think we may be moving on to our next issue, which is, as promised, Murder on Ice. And we've got another situation where ICE agents or ICE officers stopped someone that they were after. The person has or has a Hispanic name, Carlos Ivan Hernandez. So I'm going to try to stop him. And of course, they were going to say he's a gang member, and of course, there was a problem with the that he caused when they were trying to arrest him. And what happened appears to be this car, and he tried to leave. They blocked in front. They gotten in front of his car, so he put it in reverse and went backwards. And of course, this allows ICE to claim that it is under attack and the agents were assaulted and they were going to have to uh, have to resort to firing their weapons, which they did. They shot at least 11 times. The reports are 11 times through the front windshield, and then he tried to jump the median and get on the other side of the road, which, if somebody's shooting into my car, I think I might try to go a different direction too. I makes sense to me. Um, but of course, this whole weaponization, or as they say, the weaponization of the car to attack ICE agents is something that we've heard repeatedly. We've seen that it's even in documents suggested for the border patrol to use as an excuse to justify their actions. In documents, they actually have documents from 10 years ago, etc. And so it's here we go again, and we'll have to wait for the official body cam footage to come out. But this is all familiar territory. There's no audio available, apparently. There is a video, but there's no audio because the sound was not on, so we don't know exactly which officers were the ones shooting. And as I say, we know that at least 11 shots, if not more, which is certainly possible. Anything on ice you're thinking? Oh, it looks like you may be muted.
Yeah, sorry, there was people talking outside. These are these actions never cease to be heartbreaking. Um, and there's so much that is like in favor of the ICE officers, whereas like the laws in our country were originally written to be in favor of the suspects. People are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. They're supposed to have um that proof is supposed to be beyond a reasonable doubt. It's supposed to be chosen unanimously by a jury of your peers. And like this has been, you don't have to go that far back to realize that this has had a lot of flaws in the system, but there should be so much benefit of the doubt. But all of this, it's reversed. And so in a system where all of those things in favor of the suspect, and still people get falsely accused, falsely arrested, etc., etc. And now we have these ICE agents who are just, empowered to be executioners if they're nervous about whatever. And not only that, but to your point, there's a lot of like um sort of like standby words to use to help them self-exonerate. Um, and a lot of these, there's been a lot of discussion about body cam footage and stuff, and a lot of research has shown that body cam footage, um, or footage from officers' cars or whatever, can often make things seem more intense than they are. Um, and so there's been such a big inversion. And mind you, like ICE, like before the existence of ICE, like this was, it's not a felony to be here. It's, comparatively, for a lot of undocumented people, it's, some of them, their documents lapsed and they couldn't get them redone or whatever, right? It's not, despite what we hear in the government, it's not about protecting ourselves before they do something. These are people just trying to go about their lives, and I can imagine how terrifying it is to be going about your life and all of a sudden you're stopped and you realize, like, maybe these people are going to deport me, even if they or and maybe that deportation will involve being sent to a prison camp, and I don't even have to be guilty of anything just because of my name or my skin tone or whatever, and all of a sudden I'm in a prison camp with no, whatever. Of course you would panic, and now that panic has led to this person being shot 11 times. um, and it's just horrifying.
Shot at, and not only is your point about they're here, they're uh, trying to make certain that they don't have problems. So they're going out of their way to not do things illegally while they're here because they don't want to draw attention to themselves and they don't want to be arrested. Um, and on top of that, the immigration, the way the immigration is set up, you have to be here for a number of years prior to be given the appointments for the court dates. So you have to be here, in fact, to be able to get X number of years in and then get to your hearing for the judge to decide whether or not they're going to grant you the next step in the process. So, process set up by both Republicans and Democrats for decades actually is the inverse of what people might think, or the way that some groups of Republicans want there to be a problem and want there to be a bigger issue of how there's so many people here and they're not really supposed to be here, but actually they are, and it's part of the process to get here permanently. So it's a lack of understanding that allows to justify, frankly, racism and the idea that others don't belong.
Yeah.
All right, I think we'll be moving on. And speaking of folks from other places and things from other countries, there's the international news. We'll go right to that. And apparently, in Greece, it's the newest nation to embrace a social media ban for minors. And this is happening across a number of countries. I believe the UK's looked at it. I know that in the US we've been talking about it and going back and forth about it, but Greece has taken the next step in it, apparently, and they are following other EU countries as well as Australia in setting this up. There's been a lot of evidence that the social media is harmful to minors, and not only to literally to them physically, but also mentally. That there are issues from having been involved with social media, so it makes sense. It's just I think that it's a good policy choice, and so hopefully others will pick up the example of all these other countries that are starting to join in on the ban. What do you think about the ban?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a little part of me who was online definitely before this grease ban, I think, is 16 and up. And there was a part of me that was online before I was 16, and so there's a little part of me that's like, well, I had whatever, whatever. But I do think it's also worth noting now is on back in the days of America Online, which was definitely not the full internet. It was just a very curated walled garden. Um, and I think that there's uh, something about this. I don't know. There's a lot of scary stuff out there, and there's a lot of like. I like to have, as a person who, when I was a teenager, feel like I didn't have myself like autonomy, like understood enough. I also realized like if I was 13 or whatever, and I don't know, I got a modicum of celebrity and then people are threatening me every day or whatever. Like I don't know if I could handle that now as a full adult. Like um it's almost akin to like almost like child actors, I guess, in a certain way. Like there's children are able to act and whatever, and if that's something they like, or they're talented or whatever, but there is so much that has been put into place to make sure it can be done safely. um, and I think that these kinds of um, safeguards, if they're done um, if they're done, in communication, and that way people who are children can get the best out of the incredible resource that the internet is, even though social media debatable. Um, but do things safely. I think that there's a reason. It's interesting because the a lot of people talk about the social media being like the town square, and like if somebody is especially quite young, you wouldn't send them out to just run around in the town square by themselves. Um, so yeah, I think that I would like to know, maybe it would behoove me to know more like what the ban looks like practically, if it's just a ban on social media, but like freedom other things, um, and especially actually now I think about it now, especially with like AI and whatever, it's just it's messy. I understand the need for these kinds of things.
Yeah, excellent point. And there is room also for individuals. Some people are more mature than other people, and so perhaps chronological age is not the catch all that it would be nice for it to be. It's easier to do that than it is to set something up that would be responsive to the individual,
Right.
which is got to check that out. See what can be done with that. Next story for international news, we've got information. The Center for Global Development is pushing for more vaccine development in smaller countries. And as we know from the current experience that we have in the United States, that where you have the government actually reversing its policy of decades and the reversing the policies based on science and as well as experience that suggests that vaccines are helpful. You've got the reverse of that in these past couple of years and stopping certain vaccines for some. They say it's a reason. I don't know about that. I don't know reason's the best word, but it also an unintended consequence of that is that some parents have started to pull back on a number of other vaccines because they say, well, if we're going to stop doing this one, then shouldn't we be concerned about them all, and shouldn't we hold off on doing the others? And that creates another problem beyond just the matter of not being protected from certain illnesses, but that that there's that whole thing about herd mentality or herd immunization, where when certain number of people get a vaccine, it helps create a community defense against certain types of illnesses and viruses, and that's trouble when people start walking away from it based on nonsense. But here they're saying that there's a here's a group saying in the smaller countries we need to start pushing it and seeing if we can get the vaccines started there again, and so that we will all be better off. Have you had your vaccines?
I have. I am very pro-vaccine and also the child of a nurse. And apparently, I was a pretty sickly child, so my mom will call and pester me if I do not get my vaccines. Um, but no, I mean, I think that some of the energy behind this is in a certain sense, the like more populous countries tend to be the wealthier countries. And then if they're the ones developing vaccines, and then there's a certain level of control of not only control of like the vaccines themselves, but also like how do we get there, right? Like for instance, if you could convince a handful of big countries that like mRNA vaccines are not safe, then maybe that would stop their research, even though they were a massive breakthrough. um and there's also this I don't know, there's just this idea that like it's never good for some or any scientific breakthrough to be primarily controlled by a handful of countries. um so, I think that this is a great idea. And and there's lots of evidence that shows that, people with different uh ways of being raised, cultures, histories, they can think differently, they might learn to approach vaccines differently. Um there's just like any kind of brainstorming, the more variety you can get, the better. And so to have a handful of wealthy countries leading stuff, um, it has some downsides. And so it's great to have like this um, empowerment of diversity of uh, where this stuff comes from.
Excellent. Yeah, I absolutely agree. We're going to move on to the story of an unnamed senior Pentagon official who apparently, and I'm not saying that it was Pete Hegseth because I don't have any evidence to say that it was Pete Hegseth. So I'm going to say allegedly it was Pete Hegseth, who is the senior official at the Pentagon, who was doing this. But apparently, he invited Vatican cardinals to meetings to tell them that the Pope had better be supporting the U.S. in its military actions across the globe because the U.S. has military force and it can use it at any time, anywhere in the world. I don't know if this senior official, who may or may not be Pete Hegseth, was saying that it was going to be potentially used against the Vatican itself, but the Vatican is in the world, and the military reach of the United States certainly is global. And but so he scolded, I guess, the cardinal into trying to persuade the Pope that he should be supporting war, which I don't know if popes do that anymore. I don't think they are big war supporters at this point. What do you think about the Pope?
uh what do I think about the Pope is a big question. um as for this, I feel like it's like a weird, it's very classic sort of Trumpian mobster like techniques or tactics. Um but it's interesting because the Vatican is a country with not a lot of money and not a lot of population, but a lot of input and influence. Um and so, and to your point, like they're pretty um I don't know. I feel like it's an interesting thing in that Yeah, they don't tend to be super warmongery. Even the defense of the Vatican is like provided by the Swiss Guard. They don't even have their own defense. Um, but I feel like um, it's like this interesting um like from an objective point of view, like Trump does not need the United States does not need the permission of the Vatican, and we can do whatever we want. And so it's definitely like both some mix of just like optics and some idea of Trump or whomever just being like can't stand the fact that like somebody would listen to disagrees with them, and they can't just be like, oh, well, it's a shithole country, or um, or they hate us or whatever, because there are people who listen to the Pope, um, and and so I think it feels very, um, I don't know, it's a little bit childish, the idea that like, oh, I can't believe anybody would disagree with me, even though like from a broad perspective, they have the Vatican is as hopeless as helpless as a lot of the other people who've tried to go against Trump, and he's just been like, well, I'm not going to listen to you. Like it's so yeah, it feels like it's like this weird grandstanding slash childish temper tantrum.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a heavy-handed and it's ridiculous, and it is just the sort of diplomacy you would expect from these guys. This is the sort of stuff they do. They don't take the thing They don't take the position seriously. They don't take their office seriously, and they just sort of bumble through trying to do a second-rate mafia imitation from watching The Godfather, I guess, and allegedly. And they this is just another attempt. And the Pope has this Pope has made public statements against the war and against these sort of actions. And maybe the historical model is different. And there are popes from the past who would work with military force to achieve certain goals, but that's hundreds of years old. It's certainly not anything that is in the modern era. And but it is also a fair point that you made that it was never their own their own military. It was getting the military in France or getting the soldiers from France and England and other countries and getting them to go to do something that in Spain and etc. So it was always working through somebody else. But yeah, it's cartoonishly buffoonish. And whoever it is, and I'm not saying once again, I'm not saying that it was Pete Hegseth. That a unnamed senior official is the one who is said to have done it. But whoever it is certainly has outreached themselves, and it's actually ridiculous. Speaking of overreach and doing things that are beyond one's true capabilities or perhaps wisdom, Trump has in the war in Iran um, has recently both threatened to bomb them into the Stone Age. That was last week. And then this week said that there's a 2-week ceasefire in place. So this is, once again, the sort of two-sided thing that he always does. He says takes 3 or 4 different sides in an argument, and then later says whichever one actually happens, well, that's the one I said. That's the one I predicted. And so here we go again, and we'll see what happens. The ceasefire has been its own little buffoonish little thing because the ceasefire has been followed by missiles being launched and continued violence. So you're really not getting anywhere quick. And there was also an incident where he sent out a tweet. I have the actual tweet here to read off. So he said, Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one. There'll be nothing. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. So this is a statement from a United States president, folks, seated president, and everybody. I mean, even supporters, even people who have gone out of their way in the media to support him. Everybody said, "This is too much. This is ridiculous. This is not the sort of thing that should be. This should be unacceptable." And they're right. It should be. It is acceptable because he does it and he gets away with it. But it certainly shouldn't be acceptable by anyone. Period. Even a raving lunatic. Um, so, how about that? What do you think about the statement from our seated president?
It's it's definitely horrifying, and it's weird because it's literally the same strategy he was using with tariffs. Um, just being like, I'm going to do this, and then he was like, oh, it was just a tactic to get them to the bargaining table. Um, even though he was the one who started this war, slash excursion slash war. But
Don't say
it's not. I feel like it's. I don't know how to say this in a way that like holds the weight of all of this. Um, but I think when he was threatening tariffs, it was awful, and people. It cost people. It had true, real world consequences, as was known. But also, I feel like um, threatening annihilation in another truth or whatever. He said something that like a whole culture will be destroyed tonight. So it's literally threatening genocide. Is like definitely not. Um, it was never a joke, but it's sort of real serious now. Um, and it's not even you also it's also like not deniable, right? You can't just be like, well, he didn't threaten genocide. He was just against people who are, whatever, being violent or whatever. But to literally say like a culture will be destroyed is like genocide by definition. Um, and so there's like not a way to like, and you can't like LOL just kidding about genocide, which is another big tactic that these conservative people use, where it's like they'll say some shit, and if people roll with it, then that's great. They'll push it further next time. And if they get pushback, they'll just be like, that was just a joke. But it's like, I don't know if you can really joke about this. I mean, I guess Elon Musk had his Nazi salute, so I guess you can, but it's to your point, and I think we'll get to this more later, there was definitely some people who were like, okay, this is too far now. Um,
right.
so
Exactly, and they're never actually joking.
yeah, I don't know.
They, as you pointed out, they say it because it's the thing to say
Right.
to try to get to backpedal out of saying something that people don't accept. Um, and you're absolutely right. They do that all the time. They say anything and everything to see what will stick, and then try to move forward if you let it. And then if there's then occasionally then they'll say, "Oh well, it was a joke," or I was just talking about things. I wasn't really suggesting that. And um, it's all just deception. It's all just putting out the same old. I'll say whatever I want to say, and we'll worry about just like the war itself. This whole thing of going into Iran was a misfired attempt at trying to look tough. It gave Pete Hegseth a reason to talk about him being a warrior ethos and being the head of the Department of War because it's actually called the Defense Department, and it's not doesn't sound tough enough. It doesn't. It's so much better when you say Department of War, and you can get that on a silk jacket and it will look really cool. And you certainly do want to look cool in front of your friends. And, CPAC happens every year, and you want to make certain that you can go there and look cool, and you want to be able to go to you know, all the shindigs in DC and talk about how you're the War Department head. And
Right.
so it's it's all pushing to see what you can get away with without any sense. Like the war itself, as I was saying, was not planned out. Was not There was no end game to it. There were no particular goals for it. So every sort of military sin, if you will, that has been pointed out in military actions over history were all the missteps were there. And so, here we go again. And of course, it was to try to distract from the Epstein files and to try to give someone the ability to sound tough. But it's not a game. It's not a game when missiles actually are flying. And it's not a game when you're talking about, prior to these events, Iran did not control the Straits of Hormuz. It was only after this military action that Iran seized it and started shutting it down and started making certain that only their friends, the Chinese or whoever they wanted to let go through, went through. And frankly, they do have a very positive relationship with China. If China says to them tomorrow, open up the straits and let all the ships go through, then straits and we'd have all the ships through. All those 300 ships that are backed up there now would be let through. Now China's not going to do that. They have no uh, there's nothing to there's no impetus for them to do that. But my point is, these are these are allies, and these are the ones they're going to listen to. And most certainly, the U.S. will no longer have the cachet, the ability to try to negotiate things, east, which it has for had some ability for decades. But it looks like I would say their political capital has been expended by elections, and we'll have to see what happens. But I would suggest that it's not the master stroke of foreign policy that some would have you believe. Any other last comments on that before we move on?
No, but I did want to say, about as far as a distraction from Jeffrey Epstein. It's true. We have not talked about Epstein for a few weeks, and mostly because every news article is somewhere around the war. Um, and that's awful. The war shouldn't exist, and it's we should be talking about Epstein and what's happening there. So
Absolutely true. Yeah, and I would hope that there were shows out there that reminded everyone about the Epstein files at least once in every episode, and were able to keep it at the forefront, or more, at least keep it in the conversation, and not be distracted by things like, you know, actually, it was Donald who had said in a previous during the Obama administration how clearly Obama was going to attack Iran so that he could distract people from the current situations and the current things that he was other things that policy decisions that he was making that weren't going over well. And so here's this tool of distraction that would be used by any president like Obama, and yet Obama didn't do it. Obama negotiated with Iran, and he made a deal that actually worked and was actually in place, and only to have Trump come in and remove it. And all of that, he was saying, was a distraction from something like the Epstein files, which of course Obama is not in, and Obama and Joe Biden is not in. So they didn't need to worry about having a distraction from the Epstein files like Trump.
yeah,
And with that, we will move on to our next issue. That being, our friend Tom Bickle, who is not here this week. We'll be back next week. Don't worry, all you Tom Bickle fans. And as Hannah said earlier, who isn't a Tom Bickle fan?
who
We need to
isn't?
get T-shirts.
Yeah,
But with 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 Tom not present, we thought we'd kind of take advantage of the situation, and as we're in New York, they thought we'd have a little bit of a chit chat about what's going on hyper locally in New York City. And so I'm gonna turn that over to you, Hannah.
Okay, so last week we did a New York story, but it was about the state level, and so this is not only New York City because we both live here, but we also both live in Brooklyn, so it's very local. Um, so first, actually, this first thing is not necessarily Brooklyn, but recently it came out that our new mayor Zoran Mamdani had done some calls to 311 or from a 311. He like when people called, he answered to solve their issues. Um, and it's like it's cute, it's fun. But I think that it also kind of goes to like one of his central tenants, and that a lot of us have kind of brought up, is that like what he's doing is the calls that 311 gets in many ways are like not uh they are bipartisan is not the right word, and nor is apolitical, but like they go across party lines, right? Like if you have potholes or bed bug infestations or um, you can't figure out how to turn off something or whatever. Like these are a lot of calls that go to 311. And in a sense, like that is the it should be the meat and potatoes of what the mayor and those below him care about. And oftentimes, especially in New York City, where it seems like many mayors here seem like it's a job to audition for the presidency. Um, the president who should also be interested in these in fixing these like simple infrastructure things as well. um but so I feel like it's good, apart from just being like looking good on social media. I feel like it really does kind of speak to his point.
And for those who are not in New York City and may not have the similar service in, as Hannah was saying, in New York City, you can dial 911. I'm sorry, you can dial 311. There's also an app, the 311 app. So all government services are tied into it. So if there's someone illegally parked in your driveway, you can report it to 311. They look at government cars first, but there you can at least report things there. If the leaves have covered over the vents, the sewage hole that's down at the corner of the street, you can report that and get some action on it. If you have specific things that are not typical garbage, things that are too large to be just thrown into the garbage bin, then you can use 311 and set up a pickup and for a special pickup. And there's all sorts of government services you can access through 311, where you're not clogging up the emergency lines, which should be only for emergencies, right? So this is a way to for non-emergencies, but still things that you want action on, something you still want to see happen.
Yeah, and you see those kind of like they are on social media, but they predated that, where like people will call 911 for like absurd things, but they don't know who else to call. That's kind of what's nice about 311, is when you're just like, this isn't like an emergency, but also I have no idea how to deal with this thing. You can just call 311 and they'll be like, oh, this is how you do it.
Exactly. At least direct you to the right place if they can't actually do something themselves. So
Right.
very beneficial.
They will also direct you to 911 if it is an emergency that you underestimated, as a person who's called for gas leaks before, and they're like, that's actually a 911 problem. And I'm like, oh, okay. Um, all right. On that same note, the beloved Brooklyn Cyclones, our Brooklyn minor league team, is having their 25th season this year. If you live in and around New York City, or you want to come see some local sites, come visit and see the Cyclones. I have a friend who goes to their like opener every year, and they don't even care about baseball. They it's like a thing. They're like, oh, I'm gonna go see the Cyclones every year. Um, but yeah, it's fun, and it's fun to like have. Um, it's fun to remember that Brooklyn, as much as it's part of like, and this is true of Manhattan too, as much as they're part of like a giant famous city, we're also just doing like local city stuff all the time, and so like you can just go see like a local minor league team. You don't have to. Um, it doesn't have to be the Mets or the Yankees. You can just go see the Cyclones.
You can see the Cyclones and actually afford it. You can
Right.
actually go to a game with your family and afford the tickets and afford the food that's there while you're watching a game. So yeah, it's just an entertaining way to spend some time.
Yeah. On the subject of anniversaries, the New York Transit Museum, which is in Brooklyn, is celebrating its 50th anniversary. And the Transit Museum, if you either live here and want to go see something that's really neat, or if you just find yourself in town, it's actually a pretty cool museum. They have like these really old trains, um, and you can go see them on like electrified rail. You can get all kinds of fun little trinkets and whatever. And the old trains are really cool. They have like wooden like wind blade fans like you would have like in your living room or whatever. Um, and I think they also switch out the ones that they have on display. And they're doing a bunch of special stuff for the 50th, including a citywide scavenger hunt of just like MTA uh, facts, fun, interesting things. Um, and you could probably actually, I think, even if you do not live near New York City or do not plan to visit anytime, I think they also have like an online place you can go and just like learn about the transit museum. And it's pretty cool.
Excellent,
It's the
excellent.
largest transit system in the world, according to the system that we invented to make it the largest one.
And my understanding is it was originally two different systems with slightly different tracks, which is
Three.
why the integrating the systems is has been had some difficulties. But they were two different systems, and they were combined to make what we now know as the MTA. But it's allowed the subway system to go to all five boroughs, uh, and now there's talk in the Manami administration about free bus service, which has been tried in other places and has succeeded. So there's no reason that we can't do it. There's a lot to know about. There's a lot of history to it, and a lot of fun stuff too, as you point out. Speaking of fun stuff, I'm going to throw one thing into here right now, and that is there is a giant statue of a pigeon that's been put up on the High Line. There's a park that was built on a former bridge, an overtrack, and uh, it has all sorts of artwork all along the way. One of the things was a giant statue of a pigeon because it's New York City, and they've had last year they had their first annual Pigeon Day, so they had a little celebration of pigeons. They had people dress. They had a costume prize that they gave. So they had people dress up as pigeons and walk across the stage and do their a little routine if they had it. And that was a lot of fun too. They did it this year, but they won't be doing it next year. There is going to be the statue of the pigeon is going to be replaced by a different statue, and that will be, I guess, every 2 years or so. They're going to replace it with a new piece of art to come on over and look and enjoy. But if you were here or you saw maybe on a TikTok or something like that, you occasionally came across people dressed up as pigeons and dancing in the subways or something like that. That was all related to the Pigeon Day.
According to the bird calls I hear outside my windows, we will continue to have live pigeons, though.
We will certainly not lack pigeons in New York City.
Yes, yes. And then to sort of end out our hyperlocal segment, there is going to be an Earth Day celebration in Prospect Farm on Saturday. That's not this Saturday, it's the following Saturday, April 18th from 12 to 4. Just go there. Even if you don't live in New York or the US, you should come to this thing or at least go to a local Earth Day celebration. Um, and it actually looks like it's going to be pretty cool. I've never been to Prospect Farm. I did not know it existed before recently.
There you go. And I know I've heard of it. I just haven't actually been there. But it's certainly right there, right in the middle of Brooklyn. So it's something that should be checked out. That's certainly true. I'll
Yeah,
commit to that. I'll get over there and see what's going on.
yeah, I might be interested in this plant sale and swap.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very well. Meet you there.
All right, sounds good.
We'll move on as well here on PolitiPod Live, and we will go to our next issue, which is accomplices. And this is we wanted to certain make certain to mention things that have been going on in the world of politics as far as those who are accomplices. And we've all heard, I think, by now that Pam Bondi was fired as Attorney General, replaced by Todd Blanche, and who a former attorney for a particular felon who's down there in D.C. right now. And Todd Blanche, in his first few days in office, publicly stated that no one has any idea why she was fired. Now, I would think not being a very good attorney general would be enough of a reason to fire her, but that's not who we're dealing with. I mean, the people who were above her were not those sort of people who worried about competence. They're just concerned with loyalty. And I don't think that, so maybe that's what he's referring to, that she certainly showed a great deal of loyalty. And with all the decisions she made when she was an attorney general in Florida and during the Epstein file related cases in Florida, and all the decisions she made that favored a particular group of folks, I think that she'd be considered a loyal person of that clique, of that group. But here he comes out publicly stating that nobody has any idea. And so a mystery. A mystery has come out of the firing of the attorney general, and perhaps we'll get a book out of it or maybe a future movie. I don't know. Anything you have on Pam Bondi?
No, though I do, I guess this makes it not a no. I have heard a couple of commentators note that some of these recent sort of people out in the Trump administration do tend to be women. And so people are, maybe it hasn't been enough to be a true pattern, but keep an eye out of, if he's letting go uh, more women from his cabinet than men.
I would, yeah. What actually, I don't, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what the makeup of the cabinet was as far as gender
Yeah, I
balance.
don't know. I don't know off the top of my head either. Probably just off of names in the top of my head, it's probably more men, just because I think more male names are coming. But who knows?
Yeah, but in his first administration, I think the first person he fired there was Jeff Sessions.
Mm.
I may be wrong about that, but if I remember correctly, he was axed pretty early on. So it's Trump's thing. It relates to his big time as a TV star and you're fired and that kind of thing. So it's just as likely that he just wants to feel like he's back on the horse, back on his high horse and at the height of his actual popularity, as opposed to now where he's at a low point. And that UMass Amherst poll, which gave him only 33% with 62% negative reaction from people involved. He's not doing well as far as popular opinion. So being able to tie himself into his old catchphrase might be something that's very much on his mind. Um, so I guess we'll have to wait and see and find out more um, later. Now it's interesting because a number of his conservative friends have actually also made some very um, let's call it interesting, some interesting statements. Carlson called for enacting the 25th Amendment and saying that it's time that he's challenged based on his mental state and his mental abilities. None other than Alex Jones joined the rats abandoning the ship, and he pointed out that it's also fair to point out that J.B. Pritzker and Nancy Pelosi have also joined in the call for enacting the 25th Amendment. Um, but there's something about Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones, people who had defended him most fiercely, even when they personally didn't think he was right. They would publicly come out and state how much they believed in him and how right he was on all things at all times. So they're publicly now saying things. Um, Alex Jones, the recent quote was that his followers needed to cut bait, and it's time to move on from Trump due to his deterioration of not only his physical being but his mental health as well. So some things breaking on that. Those who have been his accomplices, perhaps changing their tune a little bit. Anything about accomplices before we move on?
No, I do think we should keep an eye on. I keep saying no and then having a thing. I do think we should keep an eye on some of these people who are calling for the 25th Amendment being used. You know, there's a. I was just reading. There was a never Trumper Republican, so I guess if you're on Trump's side, you could say that that person has always wanted him out. But they made a good point that we've sort of been partially because Trump keeps saying it. We've been kind of desensitized, right? He's the most impeached president. There shouldn't really be more than one impeachment ever, but he's done it. Um, and like there's whether we thought previous calls were premature, um, it's always worth revisiting. And I feel like, especially like you said, his approval ratings numbers are dropping, and um, yeah, there's just this. Um, I think it's something we should watch as more of this happens.
Yet, as more and more of those of the faithful come to their senses, come to reason, and say things like that, I think you're absolutely right. We'll have to see if that's enough to do what should have happened long ago. Speaking of things that should have happened long ago, that brings us to the Epstein count up that we have here at PolitiPod Live. Every week, we give you an update on the days that have gone by since the unredacted Epstein list has not been released. Today, that brings us to day 3,949 that the public has not seen the unredacted Epstein list. So I'm glad that there are shows out there that mention this sort of thing at least once during their show. And speaking of shows, this brings us to the end of ours. And thank you for joining us for PolitiPod Live, for political talk. You're welcome to join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here for PolitiPod Live. If you want to talk, if you want political laughs, you can join us and a half dozen of our friends for our monthly political comedy podcast, PolitiPod. You'll find that at soundcloud.com/PolitiPod.
I'm Hannah Soldner.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff saying goodbye.